Okay, so we're basically in the home stretch now. We're going to take everything we've done with SharePoint, Graph, Postman, and Flow and tie it all together in a nice little bow and complete our use case here. So what I want to do is come back to Flow. And if you remember earlier, we started to create our flow here. Okay, so I want to actually edit this. So what we did at first was we said, okay, when an item is created on our SharePoint calendar, we want to initialize a few variables. We had to stop earlier because we had to actually complete our REST calls. So now that we have those, we can come back here and keep working. So let's go to New Step. And we're going to create some more variables. Initialize variable. So this is going to be where we create our client ID. And if you watch what I'm doing here, essentially I'm just replicating what we've already done in Postman. And we're going to do it now in Flow. So this is a string. And again, we want to reference the values that we have from our Azure app. So again, we have our client ID, tenant, and also our secret string here. So I'm going to grab the client ID from Notepad, paste it in there. Okay. And that should be it for that one. Now let's go ahead and rename this to, I'm going to call this Office 365. I'm going to say initialize client, client ID variable. Okay. And that's really it for that. And okay, so let's save that. Okay, next up, new step, initialize another variable. All right, this is going to be client secret. And again, this is going to be a string. And client secrets. And there it is. And Office 365, initialize client secret variable. Okay, save. And then we're going to create one more variable. This is going to be initialize variable. And for this one, we're going to say tenant ID. So tenant ID, and this is going to be a string. Value. And okay, so I'm going to grab this tenant ID and put it in there. So let me name this first. Office 365 initialize tenant ID variable. Okay, great. So right there we have our client ID, our client secret, and our tenant ID. And if you remember from Postman, that was basically three of the variables that we had to use while making our REST calls. So now we'll have those in Flow. Okay, so next up, we want to create a new step, and this is going to be HTTP. Okay, so this is basically going to be our REST call within Flow. And so the first thing we want to do is, again, thinking back to Postman, we want to get our access token variable. Okay, so the method is going to be a post. And what I'm going to do is just fill in these values here. Okay, so let's first of all, we're going to enter request URL. Okay, so it's going to be this. And again, if I open up Postman, we can just see that it's basically doing the exact same thing, right? So here we go. So, you know, we had our environment variables, right? So app ID, tenant, app secret, and that's what we just did there with filling out our variables. And here we're just putting in this URL here. And where it says my tenants, that's where we're going to actually just put this here, tenant ID. There we go. Now, headers, we're going to say content type, and this is going to be application slash, yeah, again, it's this. And now for the body, we're going to just paste in the tenant information. So tenant, client ID, secret, grant type. So all the things that we set up in Postman. And there's a bit of a weird thing to this, which I'm going to cover in 1 second. First of all, so for the scope, you want to make sure that you have these special characters accounted for. So instead of slash, you want to put in the %3a and all these weird characters. So that's you want to make sure you take care of that. But there's one other thing that is odd about this, which I'm going to get to right now. So let me first save this. And now I'm going to go over to here and we're going to add an event. And this is actually going to fail, but it's an important piece of this. I'm going to call this ABCD, ABCD, and let's just say save. And we'll come back here to my flows and we'll see this has failed. Now, it's failed because we can see that down here we've got an unauthorized message. So this took some digging around to figure out how to get around this thing. But basically what the problem is that it's a problem when you're passing the secret string over to flow. So if I come back to edit here, we'll see that we set the headers as XWWW form URL encoded. So the problem is that I'm going to drag this over here. The problem is that when you're passing over the client secret, we actually have to encode the special characters. So I was able to find a very useful post on this, and I'm going to actually put a link in the description here to this post. But here's the post. And it's basically speaking to the fact that when you're working in Flow here, you have to actually encode the special characters here. So for example, a slash is going to be %2, a colon is going to be %3a, and so on. So basically, sorry, so to clarify, a slash is going to be %2f. But you have to actually go through and modify your secret string. So in this case, we can see that this is the string pasted right here, and you have to actually go through and change each of the special characters. So for example, the slash is going to be %2f. Okay. The plus sign is %2b, and so on and so forth. So there's a slash, a plus sign, another slash, and an equal sign. The equal sign being %3d. So if I copy this and then replace my string here in the secret area here with my properly encoded values and paste that back in, that should be okay. So let me grab this and I'll paste this back in here. And now we'll see what happens with that value properly encoded. So let me go back to the calendar here. We're going to add an item I'll call this whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't matter, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now we'll save, and let's go back to flow, and we'll see my flows, and now we'll see it succeeded. So there we go. Now we have, so this is what's returned back. So response code 200, and look at the body here. So token type and access token, this is exactly what we had seen previously in Postman. So that is a good sign. Okay, so now that we're getting our token back, we want to come in and edit our flow again. Okay, so following that, what we need to do is actually, so we send out the request and we get the token back. So now we have to actually parse that JSON that's returned. So we want to go to JSON and we'll say parse JSON. So the content that we're going to use to parse is going to be the body from the HTTP. So we can put that in there. So now what this is going to say here, so it says use sample payload to generate schema. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is that you can take the returned JSON and just paste it in here, and it's going to actually create sort of a template to use. So you can grab that from Flow. I'm just going to go ahead and grab mine from Postman. So I'm just going to copy this right here. And this is my sample payload because obviously it's the payload that is returned. And actually, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to first put it into Notepad and then I'll paste it in here afterwards. You may not have to do that, but sometimes it's useful because once in a while you get like a weird character or something in there. That's kind of a force of habit that I just do. Okay, so now we can see it has done this for us. Okay, so now we'll save that. And next thing we'll do is we're going to actually put in another HTTP request. Because if you think back to Postman, what we did was we grabbed that token and we put it into another request to actually complete our REST call. So right now, what we're doing is we're using that token, and we want to actually we want to look up the person who's going to be out of office. So if I actually bounce back to the calendar for a second, what we want to do is, so once our information is in here, we want to get the value of the requester because that's the person that's going to actually be out of the office. And that's the person whose Outlook calendar we have to create the event on. And just to further explain that, I want to open up this little flowchart thing here again. So basically, right, this is where they enter the data into SharePoint, and they're going to put in the requester, and that's going to be this person here, one of these staff members. In this case, we're talking about a physician. So the requester is going to be put in there, and now in our flow, we've got to look up who that is, and that's going to determine which calendar that gets created on. Okay, so and that's where that value is captured, but we don't need to put that in there right now. Let's go back to our flow, and now we want to say get, and basically we want to get the value of that requester email. And this is where Graph Explorer is going to come in handy again, so we can just go back to Graph Explorer and we see, okay, user by email. Okay, so that's great. We want to just basically copy this piece here. Fantastic. And then put it in there. And we have our variable that we set earlier, which is requester email. And that's going to grab that right there. So now, headers. Again, let's think back to our postman experience, and we know that we want to have authorization set. And this is going to be bearer again. And if we look down here, we can see that from our parse JSON here, this is going to actually create this variable here for us. So access token, there we go. Now that should be fine. Let's go ahead and save this. And let's do a quick test. Okay, so we'll save this. We'll go to our out of office calendar. We'll say, let's make this event on the 10th. Okay, we'll say, doesn't really matter what we put in here. And I'll say Joe Smith. And we'll click save. Now let's come back to our flow. And there we go. So that succeeded. So it's gone through all these steps successfully, right? So there we got our token right there. We've parsed that out, right? That we've grabbed our token there. And now we've completed another REST call. So we've grabbed that person from the data that was entered in SharePoint, so Joe Smith. And now what we want to do next is we want to do the same thing. So we're going to grab the sample payload here, and we're going to actually parse out the JSON again. Okay, so back in our edit mode here of our flow, we're going to add in a new step. And again, we're parsing out JSON again. Parse JSON. Okay, so this time content. So make sure you choose the right HTTP request here. So we want to get the body from our second one, and that's another example of why it's a really good idea to name your steps properly. This is not a good practice right here, so just make sure when you're doing yours that you actually name yours correctly. But I want to grab the body there. And now for the sample payload. So what I want to do is jump back to graph, and this is the get user by email, right? And so I'm going to grab all this, and we're going to copy that payload. Again, I just put it into Notepad first, and we're going to get all this stuff. Now, let's just see here. I paste this in here, and we're going to save this. And now let's see what happens. Now, I'm pretty sure this is going to fail, and we're going to look at why, but this is another kind of trick to this thing here. But if I go back here and then I just call this whatever, I'll say Rob Alomar. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure this is going to fail, and it did. Why? Well, you see, the schema validation failed. So what is this saying to us? Okay, invalid type, expected string, but got null. So what that's saying to us, so properties, so preferred language, that's where it's actually errored out. So the problem there is, let's go back to Graph Explorer. Okay, so I typed in the name Rob Alomar. So let's just say R Alomar and look up this person here. So our error here says that it errored on preferred language. And if I look at his preferred language, it says null. So it expects a string, but it got a null. So, and if we look back to the schema, let's just see here. This is based on our sample payload. Preferred language, there we go. So it wants a string, but it got a null. So the way to handle that is like this. What you want to do is basically, you can come into your schema here. So first I have to go back to edit. And what you want to do here is come into our second parse here, and let's go down to preferred language. I think I went past it. Okay, so type, we want to do this. We want to actually create an array. So we're going to start here. So we can pass either a string, or we can, oops, no, that's not right. You want to put a comma there. Or we can pass a null value, and that'll allow you to get around that. And you can actually do that for any of those types of errors. So let me just go ahead and save this. We'll jump back to our SharePoint here, and let's do the exact same thing. So we're going to call this testing 1, 2, 3 test. And now again, Rob Alomar, same name. We'll save that. Let's go back to our flow. My flows succeeded. Okay, good. So now we're all the way down here. Great. So we're getting close now. So now it's time for the very last piece for this to work, and then we can actually go through a couple of actual use cases. So we've now parsed out our secondary JSON step there. So now the very last thing we want to do is one more REST call, so HTTP. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because now, first we've got our token, and we've parsed that out, and then we've looked up our user based on what was entered in SharePoint, and we've now parsed that out. So now that we have our user, we want to actually go ahead and create the Outlook event. Okay, so we're going to come into here, and now we're going to say post. Okay, and again, we're going to go to Postman, and here we have our create event. Now, if you remember before, I said that we're going to take care of this ID, and we're going to insert it dynamically in Flow. Well, that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to copy this. We're going to come on down to here. Now I want to remove this. And what we want to do is look up our ID. So basically, the parse JSON2 is going to grab the ID right there. That's going to be available to us right there. So I want to grab that. Okay, and that's going to be the ID of the individual. So right there. So that's that ID, right? So we're looking that up dynamically. So that's going to tell us which Outlook calendar to create the event on. So again, we're going to say authorization, bearer, access token. Perfect. Content type is going to be application/JSON. Okay, and now for the body. So what we want to do here is we can actually come back to our Graph Explorer once again, and we can go to schedule a meeting. And now we're going to take this from the request body, come on down to flow, and paste it in. But we want to actually add in some dynamic content. So for example, subject, let's just say title. Let me scroll down a bit here first. Title. So now right here, so under get item, if you look back way up to the top here, get item, these are the values that are available to us right now. So title, so we'll say that's going to be the title of our meeting. And the start time here is going to be Let's look up start time. There it is. Get item, yeah, okay. And then the end, let's go down here, end time, no. Item is created, this should be under, yeah, get item end time. Okay, there we go. Now, hopefully that will take care of that. And if we've done it all properly, then this should work correctly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create an item on Joe Carter's calendar. Okay, so let's see here. Let me go back here. And we'll say, let's go over to, we'll get a fresh month here. Let's go over to here. And we'll say title, we'll say out of office. This could be a conference. And now we'll say Joe Carter. This should be a capital C. It should still resolve, but anyways. And now we'll save this. So again, I'm logged in as myself. I've selected Joe Carter as the requester. And if I come back here to, it looks like we are in good shape. So succeeded. So now, okay, all these steps ran properly. What I want to do is just come down and access Joe Carter's calendar to make sure it successfully was created. Okay, so we're going to come on back to outlook.com, J Carter, and let's log in here. This should be the password, I think, hopefully. Okay. Joe Carter, yeah. Okay, so now time zone. We have to choose the correct time zone because otherwise it's going to show up in a weird spot on the calendar. So we are in, where are we now? We should be -5. We're on Eastern time. Okay, so save. Apparently it's wanting us to do that again. Interesting. Let's just see why. Okay, so save. Not quite sure why that was, but anyways, let's say not now, and we're in there as Joe Carter. And if we come down here, April, May, out of office. Look at that, we're in luck. So there we go. So we had set the title of that to out of office. Now I didn't set any of the other parameters in there because you actually can set that within the request body if you want to add in some more variables, but this actually worked out perfectly well. So let's do one more just for posterity and we'll make sure that everything is working correctly. So before I do that, let me just go ahead and log out. So to confirm, the exec assistant, I will play that role myself, and we're entering the data here in the SharePoint calendar. And then based on who we choose as the requester, that should populate on their calendar. And then that information will be available to staff, and it will also be entered in that individual's Outlook. So let's go ahead and do one more. Okay, flow. Okay, so I'm back in SharePoint now as myself, and I'm playing the role of the admin assistant. Okay, now let's just say, who knows, from July 8th, this is going to be, again, out of office, conference, away, location. It's going to be, it doesn't really matter where we put it. Requester is going to be Rob Alomar. Okay, so I'm in there. I've chosen Rob. So that person's away for that day. Now let's do a final check here. We'll log in as Rob Alomar and hopefully everything has gone well. So R Alomar. Rob Alomar. And we'll see the calendar here. Let's come down. Let's go to July. There we go, out of office conference. So that's it, guys. That is how you can set up a flow with Graph so that somebody can create an item in a SharePoint calendar and have that same item be created on somebody else's Outlook calendar. So hopefully you found that useful. I'll be posting more videos in the future, but if you have any questions, please be sure to leave a comment, and any feedback is appreciated. All right, thanks a lot, guys. See you later.